Hey y'all, it's Friendly Neighborhood Therapist, and it is February 12th, 2025, but I missed yesterday. So this is going to be day 11 in our series of lesser known facts and lesser known people of the culture for Black History Month, and I will post day 12 right after this. All right, y'all. So first, of course, let's do a quick shirt check. Unapologetically dope. Self-explanatory. Now, for today, I want to talk to y'all about someone who was a first. They did a thing first, and it's probably not a name that you've ever heard. Let me know if you have in the comments. But anyway, let's get into it. All right, so this is William Wells Brown. He was born November 6, 1814, in Lexington, Kentucky, and he was an American abolitionist, novelist, playwright, and historian. Born into slavery near Mount Sterling, Kentucky, he escaped to Ohio in 1834 at the age of 19. He settled in Boston, Massachusetts, where he worked for abolitionist causes and became a prolific writer. While working for abolition, Brown also supported causes including temperance, women's suffrage, pacifism, prison reform, and an anti tobacco movement. His novel, Clotel, from 1853, is considered the first novel written by an African American, and it was published in London, England, where he resided at the time. Then it was later published in the United States. Brown was a pioneer in several different literary genres, including travel writing, fiction, and drama. In 1858, he became the first published African American playwright and often read from his work on the lecture circuit. Following the Civil War in 1867, he published what is considered the first history of African Americans in the Revolutionary War. He was among the first writers inducted to the Kentucky Writers Hall of Fame, established in 2013. A public school was named for him in Lexington, Kentucky. Brown was lecturing in England when the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law was passed in the U.S. As its provisions increased the risk of his capture and re-enslavement, even in northern states, he stayed overseas for several years. He traveled throughout Europe, and after his freedom was purchased in 1854 by a British couple, he and his two daughters returned to the U.S., where he rejoined the abolitionist lecture circuit in the North. A contemporary of Frederick Douglass, Brown was overshadowed by the charismatic orator, and the two feuded publicly. Maybe they had beef back then. You talking about Kendrick and Drake? Well, listen, Brown and Douglas, they was beefing. So, a little bit of background history on Mr. Brown. He was a descendant of Mayflower passenger Stephen Hopkins through his father. William was born into slavery in 1814 near Lexington, Kentucky, where his mother Elizabeth was enslaved. She was held by Dr. John Young and had 7 children. William was of mixed race. His father was George W. Higgins, a white planter and cousin of his master, Dr. Young. Higgins formally acknowledged William as his son and made Young promise not to sell him. But Young did sell the boy and his mother. In the end, William was sold several times before he was 20 years old. His brother, Joseph, has been identified by researchers Ron L. Jackson Jr. and Lee Spencer White as Joe, the slave of Alamo commander William B. Travis. Joe was one of the few survivors of that battle. William spent the majority of his youth in St. Louis. His masters hired him out to work on steamboats on the Missouri River, then a major thoroughfare for steamships and the slave trade. His work allowed him to see many new places. In 1833, he and his mother escaped together across the Mississippi River, but they were captured in Illinois. In 1834, Brown made a second escape attempt, successfully slipping away from a steamboat when it docked in Cincinnati, Ohio, a free state. In freedom, he took the names of Wells Brown, a Quaker friend who helped him after his escape by providing food, clothes, and some money. He learned to read and write and eagerly sought more education, reading extensively to make up for what he had been deprived. Around this time, he was hired by Elijah Paris Lovejoy and worked with the famed abolitionist in his printing office. During his first year of freedom in 1834, Brown, at age 20, married Elizabeth Schooner. They had 2 daughters who survived to adulthood, Clarissa and Josephine. William and Elizabeth later became estranged. In 1851, Elizabeth died. Brown had been in England since 1849 with his daughters, lecturing on the abolitionist circuit. After his freedom was purchased in 1854 by a British couple, he returned with his daughters, settling in Boston. On April 12, 1860, the 46-year-old Brown married again to 25-year-old Anna Elizabeth Gray in Boston. In 1856, Wells' daughter, Josephine Brown, published Biography of an American Bondman, an updated account of his life. She drew extensively on material from her father's 1847 autobiography. She added details about abuses he had suffered as a slave, as well as new material about his years in Europe. From 1836 to about 1845, Brown made his home in Buffalo, New York, where he worked as a steamboat man on Lake Erie. Fun fact, I am originally from Niagara Falls, New York, which is only like 20 minutes from Buffalo. He helped many fugitive slaves gain their freedom by hiding them on the boat to take them to Buffalo or Detroit, Michigan, or across the lake to Canada. He later wrote that during the 7 month period of time from May to December 1842, he had helped 69 fugitives reach Canada. Brown became active in the abolitionist movement in Buffalo by joining several anti slavery societies and the Colored Convention movement. Brown's work in anti slavery societies often included public speaking, and he frequently used music as part of the performance. Brown's use of music in his speeches emphasizes music's role in the anti slavery movement of the 1840s. See how it's bigger than the music, but the music is also very important and relevant and useful to send a message? Hmm. He traveled with a slavery themed traveling panorama. While living in Buffalo, Brown also organized a temperance society, which quickly gained 500 members. At the time, there were only 700 black people living in Buffalo. So after he lived in Buffalo, that's when he went over to Europe. But upon his return to the U.S., he gave lectures for the abolitionist movement in New York and Massachusetts. He soon focused on anti slavery efforts. His speeches expressed his belief in the power of moral suasion and the importance of nonviolence. He often attacked the supposed American ideal of democracy and the use of religion to promote submissiveness among slaves. Brown constantly refuted the idea of black inferiority. Due to his reputation as a powerful orator, Brown was invited to the National Convention of Colored Citizens, where he met other prominent abolitionists. When the Liberty Party formed, he chose to remain independent, believing that the abolitionist movement should avoid becoming entrenched in politics. He continued to support the Garrisonian approach to abolitionism. He shared his own experiences and insight into slavery in order to convince others to support the cause. In 1847, he published his memoir, The Narrative of William W. Brown, a Fugitive Slave, written by himself, which became a bestseller across the United States, second only to Frederick Douglass's slave narrative memoir. Brown critiques his master's lack of Christian values and the customary brutal use of violence by owners in master slave relations. When Brown lived in Britain, he wrote more works, including travel accounts and plays. His first novel, entitled Clotel, or The President's Daughter, A Narrative of Slave Life in the United States, was published in London in 1853. It portrays the fictional plight of two mulatto or mixed race daughters born to Thomas Jefferson and one of his slaves. His novel is believed to be the first written by an African American. Historically, Jefferson's household was known to include numerous mixed race slaves, and there were rumors since the early 19th century that he had children with the slave Sally Hemings. In 1826, Jefferson freed 5 mixed race slaves in his will. Most historians now believe that two brothers, Madison and Easton Hemings, were among his 4 surviving children from his long term forced relationship with Sally Hemings. Forced. I want to emphasize that word because people try to make that a love story and it's not. As Brown's novel was first published in England and not until later in the United States, it is not the first novel by an African American published in the U.S. That credit goes to either Harriet Wilson's Our Nig in 1859 or Julia C. Collins' The Curse of Caste or The Slave Bride in 1865. Most scholars agree that Brown is the first published African American playwright. Brown wrote 2 plays after his return to the U.S. Experience, or How to Give a Northern Man a Backbone, 1856, unpublished and no longer extant, and The Escape, or A Leap for Freedom, in 1858. He read the latter aloud at abolitionist meetings in lieu of the typical lecture. Brown continually struggled with how to represent slavery as it was to his audiences. For instance, in an 1847 lecture to the Female Anti Slavery Society of Salem, Massachusetts, he said, "Were I about to tell you the evils of slavery, to represent to you the slave in his lowest degradation, I should wish to take you one at a time and whisper it to you. Slavery has never been represented. Slavery never can be represented." Brown also wrote several histories, including St. Domingo, its revolution and its patriots, a history of the Haitian Revolution, the Black Man, his antecedents, his genius, and his achievements, the Negro in the American Rebellion, considered the first historical work about Black soldiers in the American Revolutionary War, and The Rising Sun. His last book was another memoir, My Southern Home. In his later life, Brown stayed abroad until 1854. Passage of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law had increased his risk of capture even in the free states. Only after the Richardson family of Britain purchased his freedom in 1854, they had done the same for Frederick Douglass, did Brown return to the United States. He quickly rejoined the anti slavery lecture circuit. Perhaps because of the rising social tensions in the 1850s, Brown became a proponent of African American immigration to Haiti, an independent black republic in the Caribbean since 1804. In the fall of 1861, he toured the black communities of Canada West on behalf of James Redpath's Haitian Bureau of Immigration, writing a series of articles, The Colored People of Canada, in its official journal, Pine and Palm. During the American Civil War and in the decades that followed, Brown continued to publish fiction and nonfiction books, securing his reputation as one of the most prolific African American writers of his time. He also helped recruit blacks to fight in the Union in the Civil War. He introduced Robert John Simmons from Bermuda to the abolitionist Francis George Shaw, father of Colonel Robert Goldshaw, the commanding officer of the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment. While continuing to write, Brown was active in the temperance movement as a lecturer. After studying homeopathic medicine, he opened a medical practice in Boston's South End while keeping a residence in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In 1882, he moved to the nearby city of Chelsea. William Wells Brown died on November 6, 1884, in Chelsea, Massachusetts, at the age of 70. And just 2 points for my people from Western New York, where I'm from. There is a historic marker that marks the approximate location of his home in Buffalo, and Wells' portrait by Buffalo, New York based artist Idris Wajid is one of 28 civil rights icons depicted on the Freedom Wall, commissioned by the Albright Knox Art Gallery, completed in September of 2017. So there you have it, Mr. William Wells Brown. What a fascinating life lived after being born into slavery and being in slavery until the age of 19. It is stories like his and so many others that make it really difficult for me to hear when people say we are not our ancestors. I'm sorry, I would have no problem being in this man's lineage. None at all. Our ancestors did a whole lot considering what they dealt with and what they had to go through. So we got to stop saying that, okay? All right, y'all. Stick around for day 12 in our series of lesser known facts and lesser known people of the culture for Black History Month.